Hi, this is Joe Mullings, and I'm here with The Other Side. My guest is Glenn Snyder. Glenn is a principal medtech practice leader at Deloitte, and he is joining us today from Marin County out in California. And I believe you're in a lockdown mode, my friend.
I am.
And how are you dealing with that? You just went into that, I believe it was last night.
A couple days ago, and thankfully we have toilet paper, and we no, we're blessed to be in good shape here, and so we're hunkered down, four in the house, and all trying to do a lot of web-based learning and business. So
Yeah, it's a very interesting time for sure. And you and I just saw each other out in Houston, what, about a week and a half ago with the Surgical Disruptive Summit.
exactly, yeah, and it was a great conference, and at the beginning, probably just at the edge of where conferences were being canceled, and so people were being careful with handshaking even at that conference, right?
Correct, and that I think that was the lead in. But I know I didn't see the tsunami coming. I certainly imagined it, but now that we're in the middle of it, I don't think anybody could have imagined this is where we are.
It's a great example of exponentials and how we. It's hard for people to think beyond a linear progression, and this is a perfect example of exponentials playing out in the world. Fortunately, exponentials play out in positive ways as well, and so we can, in fact, talk about that a little bit today.
That would be great. I'm not a numbers guy. I'm, I'm the other side of the brain guy, even though I'm an engineer. So I totally want to talk about that. What is Deloitte and the team keeping their eyes on, from a macro view, market wise, and then from a micro view on the medtech industry?
Well, broadly speaking, I mean, we're looking at overall economy and how businesses are responded. I'd say, our economists talk about it, the biggest picture. The big questions are how's the financial system doing, and how fast is the economy going to bounce back? Is it going to be a V-shaped response, or is it going to be much more prolonged impact? And so those are at the biggest picture the things that we're looking at. Obviously, then well, we're a client-oriented business, and we're here to help our clients make it through this troubling time, and not just survive, but on the other side to thrive. And with that, we're trying to help our clients understand all the different ripple effects that are going on through the ecosystem.
Yeah, and you and I are, I'm going to guess, in the same age range. You look a little better than I do. And you and I lived through 2000. We lived through the situation in '01. We lived through the situation in '08. The fundamentals of the market felt reasonably good up until this situation. And I refuse to call this a black swan because certainly you would know the definition of black swan better than I would. It was an outlier that nobody counted on, but there were a number of people counting on this happening eventually. Uh, but the market fundamentals, I'm hoping, brings back a V type rebound.
And we all do. We all do. And so the key is, as we look at leadership response here and being a resilient leader, it's really a key of um, responding to the immediate needs and really making sure that cash position is good, but that we're looking through all the scenarios, and it's really important that we consider all the eventualities and that we define our non-negotiables that are going to be key in playing out through any one of those scenarios, and then designing not just from a technical standpoint in that regard, but also layering in the compassionate aspect of it, so that we're really looking at a purpose-driven approach to how we respond here.
Yeah, yeah, and as painful as the medicine is right now, I think on the other side of this is a very interesting place in a very positive way. From your perspective, because you are that leader over at Deloitte, I'm breaking this world down we're in today to looking straight down at the dials on the dashboard, then looking out slightly over the dashboard, and then I don't think there's a horizon right now, which is really a little unsettling for most people. In the med tech industry, what should we be looking at right now on the dials as we look down at that dash?
I think immediately it's a matter of solving the unmet needs and in responding to the crisis. And well, so there's the external view of it, and then there's the internal view. But from an external standpoint, it's those unmet needs. And I'm sure I'll miss categories, but at least the main ones that I'm thinking about are testing kits, and we've seen already multiple companies get rapid approvals for testing kits, which is key. And I'll come back to that in a moment here because there's some nuances there. Second would be ventilators and ECMO machines to be able to support the lung, breathing issues, and protective gear in general. So just that category from masks and hand sanitizers, and then also sterile processing would be another category. So I think those are areas that we've at least identified. And what's encouraging is that we're seeing some really great responses, collaborative responses, where our regulators and the key companies in the space are working together to be able to move quickly. And I think moving quickly is important. Again, going back to where we started this conversation around exponentials, where we're seeing doubling in, what I'm hearing reports of now, doubling of some case numbers every 2 to 3 days. That means we've got to move quickly and gearing up around this. So we're also seeing some creative plays where just in the last day or two, we've heard about some non-med tech companies considering getting in to the manufacturing of some of these products. Again, these will take great collaborative efforts to do that. I've seen articles. There was one that I posted on LinkedIn yesterday, I believe, from Technology Review about a company that had defined or had designed a ventilator that was really meant for emerging markets, a low-cost unit that potentially could be scaled up relatively easy. So, can companies like that potentially scale to here, even in the hand sanitizer business, you've got cosmetic companies and distillers that are getting into the hand sanitizer manufacturing business. So a lot of rallying going on right now, which I think is wonderful to see. And obviously, our core med tech companies are key participants, not only in ramping up the scale and production of their products, but also in some cases, maybe even helping some of these other players to ramp up supplementary production too.
It's super interesting. Again, you use the word rallying, which I love. I had a couple second-tier suppliers reach out to me and try and connect me with some of the players in the respiratory business and the respirator business, because they felt like they had the manufacturing capability to lend a hand to that. And I just love seeing that in general.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It is a moment that matters for us as individuals, for the companies in the industry, for our whole society, and I think that we're really seeing some amazing reactions to that.
Yeah. And you and I have had a great relationship over time, and we have over coffee talked about the emerging digital market and the importance of it in the industry, and where we should be moving from both an economic and a patient perspective and an insights perspective. Do you think that this current scenario we're in will accelerate that? And do you think that the healthcare market that was always looking for reimbursement as a core pillar might reevaluate how this declares itself?
Absolutely. We're seeing so many signs of virtual care, telemedicine being ramped up very rapidly here. And frankly, just virtual work, period. But it's impacting our healthcare business significantly too. So if I can just step back for a minute, I mean, Deloitte over the last year or so has put a lot of energy about thinking about the future of health. And so that's a 20-year out view, and trying to, again, look at the fact that a lot of technology-based industries, and healthcare is certainly one of them, follow an exponential curve of enablement. And innovation then happens in unexpected ways once you start following an exponential curve. So it's not linear, and so we can't predict exactly where things are going to be. But we did look at some fundamentals, and you know, regardless of how you look at it, we're going to have pervasive sensors that are in us, on us, around us, that are going to be collecting data, and the data can then be married up with all kinds of other data sets, population health data and non-healthcare data, environmental data, et cetera, to generate much more personalized and insightful and actionable type of care insights. And that highly interoperable data, we think, is going to be key to that future. And we're already seeing trends towards data becoming much more interoperable. So all these trends are in place. What it's moving towards is a much more distributed healthcare system, and one that's focused more on prevention rather than intervention. And that's a future I think we can all get excited about. So then the question is what we're seeing happen today going to be an accelerator to that future? I would say yes, it is. That one of the things that we've seen historically is the adoption of some of these technologies ends up being the consumer first, then business models, and then third being policy. Policy is the latest to respond, and in healthcare, policy is so important for us. And so we will likely see additional policy changes just in response to the crisis at hand that helps enable some of the electronic and virtual type of care enablement that we're seeing.
Yeah, and you bring up a very, very interesting point that not enough people think about, because historically healthcare has been reactive in nature and has not
Yep.
used data to be predictive in nature. And you know, it's always easy to play Monday morning quarterback. I'm hoping that the industry in general will start to look at using data gathered and sort of predictability to, and even predicting these pandemic situations. I can guarantee you can extrapolate backwards. And if we use this as a powerful moment to develop a model and get out way ahead of this, and then potentially have the resources in place that would have arrested or created a fire line to this, that would have been super valuable on a world stage. And let's look at it an economic stage. And unfortunately, sometimes I think we only get the attention of the world when it comes to the economy instead of health first.
Well, Joe, you bring a great point. I read some articles sometime in the last week. So much has happened in the last week, it's hard to remember exactly when. But there were articles about some AI, algorithms that had been developed to look at epidemiology and population health that had flagged this back in December. And so the argument being, we already have some pretty good capabilities there. Maybe we're not actually utilizing them or listening to them as much as we should. So you can only expect that these AI capabilities, these algorithms, are going to get smarter, going to get more informed, be better data feeds into them over time. And that holds a lot of promise for us as well.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, when people hear about the word algorithm, they do one of two things. Their eyes gloss over, or they have something that they can't get their arms around. And the way I always explain it to people is, us as humans can only ask so many questions per second or per minute and then process those. And when you give it to an algorithm, it can ask and answer questions thousands of times per minute. And therefore, you get a better answer and a higher level of predictability that can head things off at the pass. And to your point, this exponential escalation, this is where it makes a difference.
Well, again, great point. And when I first started looking at how digital health was going to revolutionize the way we do business in this industry back in 2015, is when I really started digging into it. One of the things that dawned on me at that time was that there are roughly, and the number may be greater now, but 250,000 clinical studies conducted every year. And inevitably, our frontline doctors, physicians, surgeons ideally would be as informed as possible about all the different findings of these clinical studies. But there's no way a human brain can absorb 250,000 studies, but algorithms can.
Mm-hmm.
And algorithms can start to stitch together, well, gee, that study over there and this study over here, actually have some interesting correlations that we didn't pick up on, and that's the power of the algorithms.
Agreed. Yeah. Looking at data that we had no idea had a connectivity to it. I want
Yeah.
I want to I want to go a little micro here because it's a very interesting situation when this first started out. But now we've got a different scenario. Now we've got a supply chain around the world. So what should we be thinking about at redundancies? Because where could you have gone with your redundancies in your supply chain?
But it's and there it all comes down to a question of what's the risk tolerance, and what's the cost trade-off. Redundancy means extra cost, right? And so will this event end up um, causing people causing companies to say, gee, I'm willing to incur additional costs to have redundancies? I think the answer is probably yes. Um, in addition to the redundancy, then the question is most companies make decisions about supply chain, about where to place a manufacturing plant or even a call center based on labor rates, tax advantages, as well as proximity to the end customer and skill sets, and a whole bunch of different factors. So will some of those factors change now in the overall decision algorithm that people use to be able to make these decisions about where to place plants, and how many to have? That's the question.
Yeah, and I wonder if how long-term memory people are going to have based on this situation. And oftentimes, consequences tend to get our attention the deeper they cut.
Yeah.
Do you see the hospital business or healthcare looking tremendously different in the world that you might design or I might design on the other side of this?
Great question. Many of our clients are or had already been looking at the shift of sites of care. So there's already a lot of focus of moving um, certain types of procedures to lower acuity environments and even to the home. There's a whole wave now of hospital at home, and there's a belief that level 2 or even level 3 care can be, or certain types of level 2 and level 3 care can be done at home, obviously with the right technology and surrounding skill sets in those environments. This crisis is almost inevitably going to push that question. On the other hand, we've leaned out so many beds out of the hospital system, and I think that this crisis is also pointing to, gee, we're now going to face a shortage of beds, and certainly a shortage of ventilator-enabled beds and what have you. So how can we scale those up? We're helping a health system right now just think through how to scale up the number of beds that and what the options are for that at the moment. So I think you've got this tension, Joe, of the present need for more acute care beds, but also that trend that has been leaning more to pushing things into post-acute type of environment.
Yeah, and I think it can't be an either or. It's got to be an and. And I'm hoping that we prepare our society the same way we did in the past for other world events that unfortunately revolved around warfare. Maybe this warfare is against a virus that we will see again and again and again because of the connected world we live in. And I've said it a few times before, it won't be silos and runways. It'll be hospitals and healthcare that will keep an inventory at scale for these type of situations. The digital business world. So what's interesting, I chatted with somebody this morning on a previous episode, and he brought up, I don't have much inventory because we're a digital business. We're a virtual business. So I don't have tubing to extrude. I don't have injection molding to weld, and I don't have things I have to put on the shelf. As you being a client-based business, that's got to be an interesting proposition moving forward to refer back to in this environment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A question that is coming up quite a bit around, do we need to start to reconsider how much inventory is in the system, particularly until the manufacturing options play out a little bit more for future risk management? Is, where do you keep, how much finished goods inventory do you keep? How much raw materials inventory do you keep? Another thing that's popped up that I think is fascinating. I've read some articles just in the last 24 hours about this as well. Is the use of 3D printing, additive manufacturing to be able to produce some items. When we've looked at that as a business opportunity in the past, it's not only for a hospital to be able to print a valve for a ventilator, which is one of the stories I read that was centered on what's taken place in Italy. But in addition, to use 3D printing, additive manufacturing to be able to produce potentially some replacement parts for your manufacturing line, where it would take a couple months to get them. Otherwise, in a situation like this, you can't afford that, right? So can you use 3D printing to be able to generate some parts that you need to keep the overall supply chain as fluid as possible? So these are all levers and questions that our clients are going to be looking at going forward.
It's interesting, the medtech industry that you and I know so well, while you look at these very large organizations, these multi-billion-dollar organizations, you want to believe they're one machine. We're finding out how siloed they really are, even within their organization right now, down to the ability to communicate. And I'm just curious on how many organizations actually had a simulation in order to see if we had to show up Monday morning or not show up Monday morning at a distance. My guess would be that's how many have done it. So Deloitte, beside being a fantastic consulting insight company, you're also known as a leadership development organization and giving insights to great leadership. What lessons do you think are going to be learned, and what are observations out of the Deloitte machine in regards to where we are today?
Well, being able to scale up virtually is key, and I think just one comment on that. I think the importance of looking at all of your processes right now and figuring out, to what degree can you enable them virtually is absolutely key. So if for any organization out there, I'd be looking at sales. Can you do sales virtually? Service, how do you do that? You just think about how this will likely change and possibly permanently change some of the norms of how the industry behaves. We've got to start thinking about how we do business virtually, just in general. But I think to your point too, there's a part of just enabling the workforce to work virtually. Multiple companies I've heard talk about bandwidth issues, and they're suffering from bandwidth issues, so are using voice calls instead of video calls simply because of bandwidth issues. These are problems that can be solved. We've been working with some of the cloud solution providers to be able to stand up the ability to enable a virtual workforce very rapidly, and I think that you'll see those types of solutions be really important going forward. But fundamentally, Joe, you're just bringing up the point of preparedness, and I think that this will insert a level of risk preparation starting at the board level and going downward about, have we looked at the various scenarios and contingencies so that we feel comfortable that no matter what gets thrown at us going forward, that we're ready and able to respond to it, and that we have the right leadership processes in place, so centralized decision-making mechanism, we're able to make decisions and take actions boldly, and do that without the need for perfect information. Mm-hmm. That we're willing to, to work in an environment where the old saying, "Perfection is the enemy of good," and we want to make sure that we're, we're moving forward. And frankly, one other thing that pops in my head is just the culture, enabling a culture of transparency. And I remember reading a Harvard Business School article decades ago, maybe when I was in business school, about different cultures, an A culture and a B culture. And interesting, I can't remember which was which, but the bottom line is most organizations have a culture where people are afraid to raise bad news and what have you. It's the minority that have the culture that encourage and foster that sharing of bad news. This is the time where everybody needs to share the hard, cold facts and be able to absorb it and respond to it very rapidly. So I think those are all things that we need to be looking at going forward.
Yeah, and those are fantastic points because I was going to ask you, you've sat at the table with tenured CEOs in billion-dollar companies, and I also know you've sat at the table with first-time CEOs in A round and B round investments. What guidance do you give to that range of CEOs as they move forward without a horizon to look at right now to fix on? What would be the guidance you would share with them right now?
Well, again, I'd say developing that resilient leadership mindset and set of practices, and I've talked about a lot of them, end up being really key. Owning the narrative ends up being key as a leader for the organization, and that's about not only again having that transparency and creating a sense of trust in the organization through transparency, but also setting a compelling view for the future. Now, that's perhaps easier to do as a large organization with the momentum and protecting the cash flow and liquidity. You're able to weather the storm. For the smaller companies, that becomes a little bit harder to do just because you don't have quite as many levers to pull. But all that said, there's still levers to pull, and you got to pull them, and you got to be willing to make those decisions, and doing that again in a way that is a purpose-driven, mission-oriented leadership style that is transparent, and that's the way you get your investors and your employees and your fellow executives all aligned around what needs to take place.
Yeah. I was sitting this morning thinking about the industry, and part of me is saying this industry comes back stronger than ever because we've got everybody's attention now, and we're not going to be in second or third place from a policy perspective as an afterthought. But I was worrying about the vacuum that is possibly going to occur based on clinical trials being shut down, based
Yes.
on financing, taking the funds and keeping those that are already in play long enough, and what's going to happen to seed and A round financing over the next 12, 24, 36 months. So I'm just curious, and have you given some thought to that? What are your ideas about that, if you're able to answer that moving forward?
It's a tough one. I haven't given a lot of thought to it. I mean, it's already the innovation ecosystem for medtech is already hurting, and we did a big piece of research with AdvaMed a couple of years ago, and talked about the valley of death. Getting the innovators through the valley of death of survival in those early stages. I think the key is going to be that will policy change, and will we see something that actually helps give investors more hope about the ability to get innovative technologies that are meeting unmet needs through the process quicker, and to the degree that that investors feel that's the case, then there'll be, I think, an opening up of investment opportunities as a result. um, Certainly in the near term, we're going to see an impact to the elective procedures and the products that go along with it. My own hip replacement surgery got canceled for April. So for the company that was going to provide my hip, that's now going to be done sometime later this year, hopefully. But in the meantime, there's a lot of money being spent again on products that are needed for the crisis today, and I think that we need to not only look at those shorter term impacts, but also look beyond it at returning to normalcy, when we'll see a balancing of the consumption of those products over time. So I'd encourage everybody to look to the other side, to your language, Joe, and really prepare yourself. Um, do everything that you can to ride through this, and let's be ready to respond to a robust demand for services once it all comes out on the other side.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you want to keep in mind you don't want to run out of will and you don't want to run out of resources. And all you need to do as a owner, a player, a CEO, an investor is stay in the game. Because on the other side of this is a very robust medtech industry. On the other side of this, I believe policy is going to drive innovation and force innovation to protect the world, not just the United States, against similar things, because we can't replicate this one. And that will drive the economics back into our industry. But right now, I think we're just got to sort of plug the dike and try and get all those critical resources to our frontline heroes, and just stay in the game.
Yep.
Listen, can I lean on you as time goes on to stop in periodically, because you've got some great insights, and I think it helps settle people's nerves, because you do have a worldwide view on things. If I can count on that, that would be super.
Be happy to, Joe.
Great. Listen, take care of yourself. I will chat with you soon. Thanks again. I appreciate it. Glenn Snyder from Deloitte, and this is Joe Mullings on the other side.